The year was 1943, a time of war. The North African desert wind graced the night air as Squadron 37 approached their takeoff position. A Wellington aircraft with 6 airmen on board lifted off on a mission to Torino in northwestern Italy. They never reached their destination. The plane went off course and crashed over the mountain village of Bardi, south of Milan. Their mission lasted 8 hours, but for this small community, the memories of this event and the search for the identity of these men continued for generations. In 1959, the Chiappa family of Bardi moved to Canada and continued to search for the names of the airmen. Years later, they found the identity of the fallen Wellington crew, including Canadians Colin Wheatley and Hedley Fitch. This is the story of a tragedy that touched the lives of a compassionate community and would come to closure 60 years later for all those involved. The outcome? A story of 2 nations affected by war. A story of how this singular event brought 2 families together to remember. In Canada, Leslie Fitch of the Royal Canadian Navy remembers his brother.
Hedley was the aggressive type. He was scared of nothing, and I quite understood why he had joined the Air Force. I had received a thank you note from him for a carton of cigarettes that I had sent him a little while before. And in his in the postcard he sent me, he explained that he had a good many more trips to make, but he was confident that he was going to make it.
At the time, Adriano Chiappa was a young man living in the mountain village of Pilati, near Bardi, Italy. Now living in Ottawa, he remembers his days as a young Italian soldier. The armistice had just been called, and Adriano departed the military camp near Yugoslavia and made his way home to where his family was waiting.
It took about 2 months to get home. The trip was difficult. Not only did I have to walk all the way, I had to sleep and hide outside. By the time I got home, I was really sick. This was about the 12th or 13th of November. About 10 days later, I was sick in bed with a high fever. There was a bad storm that night, and my father was sitting next to me in my room, when all of a sudden we heard an enormous, thunderous roar coming from the mountain. Everybody except me went outside to see what had happened. They saw the fire on the mountain.
It sounded like the end of the world. The combination of the thunderstorm and the horrific noise of the plane crashing, we all had a terrible fright. It was a terrible night. It fell on our mountain, it flew over the Cesaretto, cut off the top of all the trees. It was evident that it couldn't regain altitude as it hit the crest and flipped over to our side of the mountain. Not far from us, about 30 minutes by foot. Not very far from our house.
The fog was probably bad that night. The pilots most likely found themselves in front of a wall of fog. If it had been a clearer night, they might have been able to save themselves.
Bruno Berni, who is now the mayor of Bardi, was a teenager at the time of the crash. He'd grown up in Wales and had studied English. He recalls going up to the crash site the next morning.
When I went up the next morning to see the site of the crash, you have to remember I was just a 16-year-old boy. What I saw really shocked me. I'd never seen anything like it before. There were lots of things scattered around. I was curious. While looking around, I saw some papers and documents on the ground. I picked one up, and it looked like a series of messages the radio operator had been sending while the plane was in flight.
The Wellington appeared to make 3 different attempts to recover, but suddenly, without warning, the aircraft failed to clear the mountaintop, breaking into pieces. Not far from the Chiappas home, an engine had roared down the hill for half a kilometer, coming to rest in a mountain stream. None of the 6 airmen survived. Hedley Fitch and Colin Wheatley's aircraft was only one of 12 Wellington bombers that had lifted off that fateful November night in 1943. Of the 72 airmen engaged in the mission, only 30 returned to base. This was typical of air battles in World War II. Thousands of Canadians volunteered for air service, making Canada one of the highest contributors to the war effort. Of all the airmen who died in World War II in Italy, 1 in 4 were Canadians. It was a high price to pay, something the people of Italy have never forgotten.
And then we found out the crew was made up of Canadians. Then, with the passing of time, we realized that these individuals, these fallen airmen who had died on our mountain, maybe symbolically had invited us to Canada. We immigrated to Canada in 1959. Maybe this was their calling to us. They had offered us passage and the possibility to immigrate to Canada. And this is our recognition of these unfortunate men who had died on our mountain.
Fallen heroes will be right back.
They had, received notice that he was missing in action.
In one part of the world, a fateful tragedy. Back in Canada, there was little word of what had happened.
Well, my parents kept me informed that they had, received notice that he was missing in action, and that at the time that it was just a matter of a waiting game before we found out just really what had happened to him.
I know it bothered my mother. She came from a large family, and when she was married, then of course there were just the 2 of them, and then the 3 of us, and then when he went overseas and she was left alone, she was lonely. And one thing always bothered her, in that my father had told her, never believe I'm dead until my dog tags come back. And I suspect that may have been the basis of the letters that she wrote, inquiring as to whether or not he was really dead, or whether perhaps he may have been taken prisoner and she may not have been told.
In reality, only the town knew the true fate of the crew, but didn't know their names. In a little church just down the hill from where the plane had crashed, the small village community prepared a dignified burial. Without knowing who they were, Don Dorino Ferrari, the parish priest, held a full Christian burial for the fallen airmen. Albino Rossi and Luigi Pellizza of Bardi were young men from the village in 1943. Luigi was in hiding. As a partisan against the fascists, he could not attend the service. Albino, however, did attend the ceremony.
It was a funeral exactly like if a local man had died.
Oh.
Right? There was no difference at all.
No difference at
No
all.
difference at all. They were treated like human beings, like, they were treated like human beings.
In 1943, wartime communications were far from today's high-speed standards. Adriano's daughter, Anna, questions Leslie Fitch on his recollections of the tragedy.
The details from our end is that they were given within a couple of days a full funeral, full military funeral with honors from the people of the town. And that's unfortunate that information was never passed.
That information was never passed. I believe that it was due to the fact that they were Canadians who were flying a British aircraft.
I had them in my mind for a long, long time, even now. Those 6 coffins in the middle of the church. and they had a lovely funeral.
People were crying. Mm-hmm. What did the priest say at that time? Do you remember?
I still remember.
Anche nella nostra morte insieme ai nostri fratelli defunti è contenuta la promessa della risurrezione.
They were well respected and they were given the full service. They were buried in I guess, at the Catholic cemetery. So there was a lot of respect for the airmen, and it's unfortunate that the family never really knew about that.
It certainly is. We were you know, surprised and encouraged to hear that this had been done for them under the unfortunate circumstances that they crashed, and that the people of Italy had given them a Christian burial.
Elsa Roleri was 18 years old at the time of the crash. Like most town people, she continues to carry the memories of that shocking day and recalls how people made use of the various parts of the plane.
We were curious to see what had happened. I found a knapsack in the stream and picked it up and went home.
Inside the knapsack, she found a jacket, a wallet, a compass, and a white silk parachute.
I hid it for 10 days, and when things settled down, I went to get it. I made a First Communion dress with that parachute. The girl's mother had died. They didn't have anything.
Elsa believes that nobody wants war. For 60 years, she has been a timekeeper, protecting these artifacts and stories so that young people and future generations will understand the lessons we must all learn from war. For 6 decades, the Chiappa family safeguarded some of the Wellington aircraft parts as mementos of the tragic event, out of deep respect for the fallen airmen.
Here is the box where we kept some of the pieces of the fallen plane which came down on our mountain. A Canadian airplane which crashed near Bardi. There are some more pieces. I put some of the other gears in a frame with the Canadian flag.
In a quiet moment, Elisa Herchupes visits her grandfather.
Why did you make the frame of the Canadian flag?
I wanted to frame the pieces with the Canadian flag because the plane was carrying Canadians and because we came to Canada. I wanted to make a tribute to the Canadian plane. And remember these fallen airmen who had died on our mountain.
60 years later, Adriano pays his respects to the fallen airmen at the Commonwealth War Cemetery in Milan, Italy.
I never thought I'd be able to realize this dream. I thought about it for a long time, and I'm very satisfied. I never thought I would accomplish this nice project, and I think it would be appreciated by everyone. It is important to remember our fallen, our people who died in the Second World War.
When we come back, the conclusion to Fallen Heroes.